There is a verse in the Bible that most people read without thinking twice. It is in the book of Luke, chapter 16. Jesus is telling a story. He says, "There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to eat what fell from the rich man's table." What fell from the rich man's table? That one line tells you everything you need to know about the world Jesus lived in. Because in 1st century Palestine, the distance between the rich man's table and the poor man's hunger was not just a gap, it was a canyon. It was two completely different worlds existing side by side, one drowning in food, the other starving for crumbs. And the shocking part is not just how little the poor had, it is how much the rich had. It is the sheer, almost unbelievable excess of what the wealthy ate, while the people standing just outside their gates were wondering if they would eat at all. Today, we are going to walk into both of those worlds. We are going to sit at both of those tables, and by the end, you will understand why Jesus told that story and why it hit his listeners like a punch to the chest. Let's start with the poor, because that is where most people were. In the time of Jesus, roughly 9 out of every 10 people lived at or near what we would call the survival line. There was no middle class. That is not an exaggeration. Scholars who study the economy of the Roman Empire estimate that about 90% of the population were peasants, living in small villages, working the land, and handing over a huge portion of everything they grew to someone above them. A landlord, a tax collector, a king, or Rome itself. These were not lazy people. These were families who worked from before sunrise until after dark. Every single day, in the fields, in the orchards, in the vineyards. They worked with their hands, their backs, their entire bodies. And after all that work, after an entire season of planting and harvesting and grinding and pressing, they kept just barely enough to survive. So what did they eat? Bread. That is the short answer. Bread was everything. Scholars estimate that bread made up 50 to 75% of the average person's daily food. Not the soft, white, fluffy bread we buy at the store. This was dense, dark, heavy bread made from barley, the cheapest grain available. Wheat was better, lighter, tastier, but wheat was expensive. Wheat bread was for people who had money. Barley bread was for everyone else, and everyone else was almost everyone. The bread was coarse. It was gritty. If you bit into it, you could feel the tiny pieces of stone from the grinding process between your teeth. It was baked on a clay oven called a tabun, a dome of hardened mud heated with dried animal dung and sticks. The women of the house would wake up before dawn to grind the grain by hand on a stone, mix it with water and a little salt, flatten it into rounds, and slap it onto the hot walls of the oven. That was breakfast. That was lunch. That was dinner. If the family was lucky, if the harvest had been decent, if the taxes hadn't taken too much, if no one was sick, there might be something to go with the bread. A handful of olives, a small bowl of lentil stew, some wild herbs gathered from the hillside, maybe a piece of dried fig or a few dates. But meat? Almost never. Meat was a rare luxury for ordinary people. A peasant family might eat meat a few times a year during a religious festival, or if an animal was sacrificed at the temple and portions were shared. But on a normal day? No. There was no butcher shop in the village. There was no refrigeration. Animals were far too valuable to kill for food. A goat gave milk. A donkey carried loads. An ox pulled the plow. You didn't eat your tools. The Mishnah, the ancient Jewish legal text, even discusses what happens when someone finds a piece of meat lying in the street. The rule says, finders, keepers, because people were so poor that they would eat meat picked up off the ground, meat that was probably not fresh. Meat that in our world we would throw away without a second thought. But in their world, it was too valuable to waste. And wine? The wives of the poor did not drink wine. That is not my opinion. That is a direct quote from the Tosefta, another ancient Jewish text. Wine was for men, and even then for men who could afford it. Poor women drank water, and the water was not always clean. That was the daily life of the poor in the time of Jesus. Barley bread, lentils, olives if you were fortunate, wild greens if you knew where to look, water from a well or a cistern, and the constant, grinding anxiety of wondering whether there would be enough tomorrow. Now let's walk across the street. Let's leave the mud brick house with the dirt floor and the single room where the whole family sleeps together on mats. Let's walk past the gate, past the wall, and into the world of the wealthy. And the first thing you need to understand is this. In the time of Jesus, the rich did not just eat better than the poor. They ate in a completely different universe. The gap between a peasant's table and a wealthy man's banquet was wider than the gap between a fast food meal and the most expensive restaurant in the world today. It was not a difference of degree, it was a difference of kind. The wealthy in first-century Palestine, the Herodian family, the chief priests, the large landowners, the Roman officials, lived like kings because some of them were kings. Let's talk about Herod. Herod the Great, the same Herod who was king when Jesus was born, built palaces that would make a modern billionaire blush. His palace in Jerusalem alone had 2 main buildings, each with its own banquet halls, baths, and accommodations for hundreds of guests. The grounds included groves of trees, canals, and ponds, fitted with bronze fountains. The historian Josephus, who actually saw these places, wrote that the variety of stones used in the construction was not to be expressed, meaning he literally could not find words beautiful enough to describe them. And the food served in those banquet halls? Imagine this. You are a guest at a wealthy man's dinner in Jerusalem. You arrive in the evening. A servant washes your feet. Another servant brings you perfumed oil for your hair. You are led into a dining room, a triclinium, where 3 large couches are arranged in a U shape around a low table. You don't sit. You recline. You lie on your left side, propped up on cushions, and you eat with your right hand. The table is already covered with the first course, the gustatio, the appetizers. There are olives, but not the small wrinkled olives the poor eat. These are fat, green, carefully cured olives from the best groves. There are eggs, quail eggs, not just chicken eggs. There are small dishes of cheese made from sheep's milk, drizzled with honey. There are nuts, almonds, pistachios, walnuts, imported from across the empire. There are fresh figs, grapes, pomegranates, and dates arranged on silver platters. And this is just the beginning. This is before the meal has even started. The main course arrives, and here is where the 2 worlds split apart completely. While the poor family down the road is eating barley bread dipped in a thin lentil broth, the wealthy table is being loaded with roasted lamb. Whole legs of lamb, seasoned with cumin and coriander, and fresh herbs from the garden. There is fish, not the small, dried, salted fish that a fisherman's family might eat, but large, fresh fish from the Sea of Galilee, or imported from the coast, grilled with olive oil and dill. There is roasted goat. There is stewed beef, rare and expensive, a true luxury. There are sausages made from pork, seasoned with pepper and pine nuts. The wealthy ate meat regularly. The poor almost never did. That single fact tells you more about the world of Jesus than 100 sermons. And the bread on the wealthy table? It was white, made from the finest wheat flour, sifted and sifted again until it was soft and light. White bread was baked for the elite, darker bread for the middle, and the darkest bread for the poor. The color of your bread told the world exactly who you were, but the food was only part of it. The wealthy also had spices, and in the ancient world, spices were not just flavor, they were money, they were status, they were power. Pepper was imported from India. Cinnamon came from the Far East. Saffron, the most expensive spice in the world, then and now, was used to color and flavor dishes at the finest tables. A single pinch of saffron cost more than a poor family spent on food in a week. The poor seasoned their food with salt, if they had it, and maybe some wild herbs. Dill, cumin, mustard seed, things that grew nearby, things that cost nothing. The rich seasoned their food with the entire world. And then there was the wine. At a wealthy man's banquet, the wine flowed all evening. Not just any wine, aged wine, vintage wine, wine from specific regions, stored in clay jars for years, sometimes decades. The Romans were obsessed with wine, the way some people today are obsessed with fine dining. They had favorites, they had rankings. They debated which vineyard produced the best grapes, the way people today argue about restaurants. The wine was mixed with water. Drinking it straight was considered barbaric, but it was still strong, still rich, still abundant. A wealthy Roman man might drink a liter of wine in a single evening. The cups were refilled again and again, silver cups, sometimes gold. Meanwhile, down the road, the poor man's wife was drinking water from a clay jar and hoping it wouldn't make her sick. But here is the detail that I think is the most shocking of all. And it has nothing to do with food. It has to do with how they ate. The poor ate quickly. They ate standing up or squatting on the ground or sitting on a low stone. They ate with their hands, tearing bread and dipping it into whatever was in the pot. The meal lasted minutes. There was no conversation about the food, no lingering over dessert, no second course. You ate because you needed fuel to keep working. You ate because if you didn't, you would die. And then you went back to work. The rich turned eating into an art form. A formal dinner at a wealthy home could last for hours. For the elite, a meal was a feast, a social event, and a statement of wealth and power. There were multiple courses. There was entertainment between courses, musicians, poets, acrobats, dancers. There was conversation, carefully guided by a master of ceremonies who chose the topics and made sure no one got too drunk too quickly. After the main meal, there was dessert, fresh fruit, pastries made with honey and nuts, sweet cakes flavored with wine and cinnamon. And after dessert, there was the commissatio, the drinking party. More wine, more conversation, more entertainment. The evening stretched on and on, sometimes until the early hours of the morning. A poor man ate in 10 minutes and went back to the field. A rich man ate for 5 hours and went to bed on silk cushions. Now, let's bring Jesus into this picture. Because Jesus lived in this world, he saw both tables, he sat at both tables. He was born into a poor family. Joseph was a craftsman, a tekton in Greek, which means something like a carpenter or a builder. They were not destitute, but they were not comfortable either. When Mary and Joseph brought the infant Jesus to the temple for his dedication, they offered 2 turtle doves, which was the offering prescribed for families who could not afford a lamb. That tells you exactly where they stood. Jesus grew up eating barley bread. He grew up eating lentils and olives and dried figs. He knew what it was like to be hungry. He knew what it was like to depend on the harvest, to worry about the rain, to watch the sky and wonder. And yet, and this is what made people so uncomfortable, he also ate with the rich. He ate at the house of Simon the Pharisee. He ate at the house of Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector, who was very wealthy. He ate at the house of Lazarus, Martha, and Mary in Bethany, who seemed to have been a family of some means. He was invited to banquets. He reclined at tables. He drank wine, and he was criticized for it. The religious leaders said, "Look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." But Jesus was doing something no one else in that world would do. He was crossing the line. He was sitting at the rich man's table and then walking out the gate to sit with the beggar. He was eating fine wheat bread in one house and barley bread in the next. He was refusing to stay on one side of the canyon. And his stories, his parables, were designed to make the people on both sides see each other. Think about the parable of the rich man and Lazarus again. The rich man is dressed in purple, the most expensive dye in the ancient world, made from thousands of tiny sea snails. He wears fine linen, imported, soft, luxurious. He feasts every day, not on special occasions, every single day. And at his gate, not across town, not in another village, but right there at his gate, lies Lazarus, hungry, sick, covered in sores, longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. What fell from the table, the scraps, the crumbs, the pieces of bread that the rich man used to wipe his hands. Because in that world, bread was used as a napkin. You tore off a piece, wiped the grease from your fingers, and threw it on the floor. And Lazarus would have been grateful for those greasy, discarded pieces of bread. The rich man doesn't even see him. That is the point of the story. It is not that the rich man is cruel. It is that he is blind. He has so much food, so much wine, so much comfort, that he has lost the ability to see the man lying at his own front door. And when both men die, the rich man goes to torment, and Lazarus goes to the arms of Abraham. And the rich man, from his place of suffering, looks up and sees Lazarus, and for the first time in his life, he actually sees him. But it is too late. There is another moment in the Gospels that becomes so much more powerful when you understand the food gap. The feeding of the 5,000. Jesus is in a remote place. A huge crowd has followed him. They are hungry. The disciples come to Jesus and say, "Send them away so they can go buy food." And Jesus says, "You give them something to eat." The disciples are stunned. They say, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Think about that number, half a year's wages, for a single meal for a crowd. That is how expensive food was for ordinary people. That is how far a working man's money did not go. And what do they find? 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 small fish. Barley bread, not wheat, barley. The bread of the poor, the bread that the wealthy would not touch, the bread that told the world you had nothing. And Jesus takes that bread, the cheapest, darkest, most humble bread in the land, and he feeds everyone, 5,000 men, plus women and children, and there are 12 baskets left over. He didn't use wheat bread. He didn't use fine flour. He didn't use the bread of the rich. He used the bread of the poor, and he made it more than enough. That is not just a miracle, that is a message. There is one more thing I want you to see, and it happens at the very end of Jesus' life, the Last Supper. Jesus gathers his disciples in an upper room in Jerusalem. It is the night before he dies. And what does he put on the table? Bread and wine. Not roasted lamb on silver platters, not imported spices and honeyed cakes, not the feast of a king. Bread and wine, the simplest meal, the most basic food, the food that even the poorest family in Israel would recognize. And he takes the bread, and he breaks it, and he says, "This is my body, given for you." And he takes the cup of wine, and he says, "This is my blood, poured out for you." He chose the food of the common people. He chose the meal that everyone could share, not the banquet of Herod, with its gold cups and its roasted peacocks and its entertainment and its excess, but bread. Simple bread, broken and shared, because that is who he was. He was not the God of the banquet hall. He was the God of the barley loaf. He was not the God of the people who had too much. He was the God of the people who never had enough. And 2,000 years later, when Christians all over the world gather to remember him, they don't set a table with silver and gold. They break bread. They pour wine. They share the simplest meal on earth. And in that moment, the canyon between the rich man's table and the poor man's hunger finally closes. Because at the table of Jesus, there is only one kind of bread, and everyone is welcome to eat. If this story changed the way you see the world Jesus lived in, the shocking distance between the rich man's feast and the poor man's hunger, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to keep walking through these hidden corners of the Bible with us, subscribe to Biblical Footsteps and turn on the bell. Every week we take another step deeper into the world that Jesus actually lived in. Until next time, may you always have bread to break and someone to break it with.